The wind was cold that night, not just winter cold, but the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, that makes you feel like the whole world has turned its back on you. Ethan Walker stood on the edge of the bridge, looking down at the black water below. The river moved slowly, silently. There were no boats, no people, just the sound of the wind and the steady thumping of his heart. This was it. This was the end. He had been thinking about this for weeks, maybe months. But tonight, something inside him had finally snapped. He had left a short note on his kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just a line that said, "I'm sorry. I tried." And maybe he had tried, but it never felt like enough. Ethan was 32 years old. He worked a job that meant nothing to him. He came home to an empty apartment every night. No girlfriend, no friends. His parents had passed away years ago. His brother hadn't spoken to him since their fight 2 years back. He felt invisible, and worse, like he didn't matter. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even scared anymore. He just felt tired, tired of pretending, tired of hoping things would get better, tired of waking up every day and wondering, what's the point? The wind blew harder, and he leaned forward just slightly, his hands gripping the cold rail. That's when he heard it, a laugh, light, pure, almost like a song. He turned his head. A woman stood at the other end of the bridge, walking slowly. She wore a red scarf and carried a cup of coffee in one hand. She looked up at the sky and laughed again, this time at nothing in particular, maybe the way her breath fogged the air, maybe something only she understood. She hadn't seen him yet. She was just walking, but something about her laugh broke through the silence in Ethan's head. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the pain, but it pulled him back just a little, back from the edge. He stepped down quietly and sat on the bench, near the rail, head in his hands. The woman noticed him now. She slowed down, watched him for a moment, then, instead of passing by, she walked over. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" He didn't answer. She sat down beside him, leaving a bit of space, her coffee steaming between them. "I always come here when I need to breathe," she said, staring at the water. "This bridge listens better than most people I know." Still, he said nothing, but something inside him shifted, a small piece. The woman glanced at him. "You don't have to talk. I just didn't want to walk past you without saying something. That never feels right to me." He looked up, and she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not the fake kind people wear when they don't mean it. It was soft, warm, the kind of smile that says, "I see you." And in that moment, Ethan felt seen for the first time in what felt like years. They sat in silence for several minutes. She didn't ask his name. She didn't ask what he was doing on the bridge at midnight. She just sat there. After a while, she stood up. "I'm going to go," she said. "But if you're ever here again, I usually walk this bridge every Tuesday night. You know, if you want to talk sometime." Ethan looked up at her. "Why did you stop?" he asked quietly. She shrugged, adjusting her scarf. "Because sometimes people just need someone to sit with." And with that, she walked away into the night. Ethan watched her go, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like jumping. He didn't feel whole, but he didn't feel broken all the way through either, and that was something. The next morning, Ethan woke up in his apartment and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He hadn't planned to be alive today. Everything felt strange, like he was living someone else's life. He went into the kitchen and saw the note still sitting on the table. "I'm sorry. I tried." He picked it up, stared at it, then folded it and threw it in the trash. Then he made himself coffee, bitter, too strong, and sat by the window. The woman hadn't saved him, not exactly, but her smile had reached him when nothing else could. That meant something. He didn't even know her name, but somehow, she had reminded him he was still here, still human, still capable of feeling something. That was more than anyone else had done in years. Over the next week, Ethan tried to return to his routine, his job at the insurance office, his lonely lunches, his empty evenings, but everything felt a little off. Like the shadows weren't as dark, he kept thinking about the bridge, and the laugh, and the smile. He had questions now. Who was she? Why did she stop? And why had her smile mattered more than anything else? Tuesday night came again. He didn't plan it, but at 11:45, Ethan found himself walking toward the bridge. The air was cold. The sky was clear. The street was almost empty. He stood by the same bench and waited, and there she was, same red scarf, same coffee cup, same peaceful walk. She smiled when she saw him. You came back. I didn't know if I would, he admitted. I'm glad you did. They said again. Silence, then small talk. He learned her name was Claire. She was 29, a teacher at a local elementary school. She lived alone, liked cold weather, and walked the bridge every Tuesday because it helped her think. Ethan told her his name. That was all, but it felt like giving away something precious, and she handled it gently. They didn't exchange phone numbers, they didn't make plans, but the next Tuesday, they both showed up again, and again the week after that. Slowly, Ethan began to speak more. Claire didn't press. She just listened and smiled. Every week, he told her a little more about himself, how he used to draw as a kid, how his mom died of cancer, how his dad never really recovered after that, how his brother had joined the army and came back different, how he felt like the world had left him behind. And Claire just listened. She shared pieces of her own story. Too, a breakup that broke her more than she expected, a dream of being a writer she had once buried under stacks of lesson plans, a loneliness that felt quiet but heavy. They weren't so different, after all, two strangers carrying invisible weight, but for 1 hour each week, they didn't carry it alone. One night, Claire brought 2 coffees instead of 1. She handed one to Ethan. No sugar, right? He blinked. How did you know? She smiled. You seem like the bitter type. He laughed, not a lot, but enough, and she smiled even wider, like she'd been waiting for that sound. He drank the coffee. It was perfect. After a month of Tuesday talks, Ethan found himself doing something strange. He started taking care of himself. He made his bed, he cleaned his apartment, he cut his hair, he even found his old sketch pad and drew for the first time in years, not because someone told him to, not because he thought it would fix him, but because something inside him whispered, "You're still here, make something of it." One Tuesday night, as they sat on the bench, Claire turned to him. Do you remember the first night we met? Of course, he said. You were laughing at the sky. She grinned. You looked like the saddest man in the world. I was. You're not anymore. No, he said. Not anymore. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook. I write short stories, she said. Just for myself. This one's about us. Sort of. He took it gently. The cover read The Bridge That Listens. Inside were simple words, a quiet story about a man on the edge and a woman who didn't walk past. He blinked hard. I didn't save you, she said. I just saw you. That was enough. Claire's eyes softened, and then, for the first time, Ethan smiled back, a real smile, not perfect, not wide, but honest, and that changed everything. Ethan hadn't missed a single Tuesday since that first one. Every week, without fail, he showed up at the bridge by midnight. And every week, Claire showed up too, sometimes carrying 2 coffees, sometimes a story in her notebook, sometimes just her presence. The bridge had become their meeting place, not just for talking, but for feeling alive again. Ethan didn't know what this was between them. It wasn't romance, at least not yet. It wasn't therapy. It was something simpler and deeper. It was connection, the kind he hadn't had in years. One day at work, Ethan's coworker Tom leaned over the cubicle wall. You look different lately, Tom said. Did you win the lottery or something? Ethan raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You're not staring at your screen like it's the end of the world anymore. You even smiled yesterday. Ethan gave a small laugh. It's nothing, just some fresh air. But it wasn't just air. It was Claire. Her words, her kindness, her presence, they stayed with him long after Tuesday night. She didn't tell him how to feel better, she just gave him a reason to keep showing up, and that had changed everything. 1. Tuesday, the wind was stronger than usual. Rain clouds hung heavy in the sky. Ethan stood by the bench early, umbrella in hand, wondering if Claire would come. She did, soaked through, no umbrella, laughing as she ran. "You look like a wet dog," he said, half smiling. She grinned, brushing hair from her face. "I didn't want to miss it. This is our Tuesday thing, remember?" He handed her his umbrella. She refused it. They sat together in the rain, shoulders damp, hands in pockets. "Why do you come?" Ethan asked suddenly. Claire turned to him. "Because you're worth coming for." His throat tightened. No one had said that to him in a long, long time, maybe ever. He didn't reply. He could end single quotes. So they just sat, side by side, in the storm, two souls with soaked jackets but warm hearts. That week, Ethan found the courage to open up more, not just with Claire, with life. He started drawing again, not just doodles, but full sketches. He drew people on the train, children in the park, the city skyline at sunset. He even drew Claire from memory sitting on their bridge bench, coffee in hand, scarf blowing in the wind. He didn't show her, not yet, but it felt good to create something. Again. To bring beauty back into his world, Claire brought a story the following Tuesday. It was titled, "The Man Who Forgot to Give Up." Ethan read it slowly as she waited quietly. It was about a man who had stopped seeing color in the world until one day, someone walked into his life and reminded him that even gray skies can be beautiful. When he finished, he handed it back. He didn't say much, just, "That's the best thing I've read in years." She smiled, then whispered, "It's about you, you know." "I know." And he smiled back. One evening, Ethan took a risk. He invited Claire to get coffee, not on a bridge, a real cafe. She hesitated only for a second, then said yes. They met at a quiet spot near the park. No crowd, soft music, warm lights. She wore a soft gray sweater and her red scarf. Even indoors, Ethan was nervous. He hadn't done this in years, not since his last relationship ended with silence and pain. But with Claire, things were different, comfortable, real. They talked for hours, about books, about fear, about how people carry sadness like invisible backpacks. Some people carry pain so long, they forget what it's like not to, Claire said. Ethan nodded slowly, "But even then," she added, "a little kindness can help lift it." "You're good at that," he said softly. She looked down, then up. "So are you. You just didn't know it yet." After that night, they met outside the bridge more often, walks in the park, late-night texts, calls during rainstorms. Still no labels, still no pressure, but something was growing slowly, quietly, something gentle and real. One Sunday, Ethan went to the bookstore alone. He hadn't been in years, but Claire had mentioned a novel she loved, The Light Between Oceans. He found it on the shelf, bought it, then, on impulse, walked 2 aisles over and picked up a blank sketchbook. He took both to the park, sat under a tree, and read, then drew. His hands moved across the page without thinking. Trees, faces, the outline of a bridge. He filled 10 pages that day, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He felt present, rooted, awake. But healing isn't always a straight line, and some days still hurt. One evening, out of nowhere, Ethan's old darkness crept in. The weight of his past, the emptiness, the guilt for feeling happy when he hadn't earned it. He skipped a Tuesday, didn't answer Claire's texts, stayed in bed, didn't shower, didn't eat. The voice in his head whispered, "You don't deserve her kindness. You're just wasting her time." It was the same voice that once brought him to the bridge, and now it was back, louder than ever. Claire showed up at his door the next day. She knocked once, then again. He didn't answer. She sat outside the door. "I'm not leaving," she said through the wood. Not until I know you're okay. He lay on the couch, still, eyes open. I don't know how to be okay, he finally whispered. I know, she said. But you don't have to be alone while you figure it out. That broke something open in him. He stood, opened the door. She stepped in, hugged him gently, and didn't let go for a long time. No questions, no judgment, just warmth. They sat on the floor together. He told her everything, the night he stood on the bridge, the letter he left behind, the pain he carried in his chest every day, and she listened, the way she always did. Then she spoke softly. Do you want to live, Ethan? He didn't answer right away, but after a long pause, he said, I think I do now. She nodded. That's enough for today. And it was. The next Tuesday, they returned to the bridge, together, side by side. No umbrellas this time, just open sky. They watched the water, listened to the wind, and Ethan said, This is where I almost ended everything. Claire nodded, and where something began instead. He reached into his coat and handed her something, a folded paper. It was his drawing of her sitting on the bench with her scarf and coffee, smiling at the wind. She stared at it for a long time. It's beautiful, she said. You saw me, you saved me, he replied. Then, for the first time, she took his hand and held it. No more empty hands. No more lonely hearts. Just two people who chose to stay together. Ethan woke up to sunlight pouring through his window. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the heavy pressure on his chest the moment he opened his eyes. The kind that used to whisper, What's the point of getting up? Today felt different, not perfect, but better. His phone buzzed, a message from Claire. Sun is out. Want to meet at the bookstore later? He stared at the message, smiling to himself. A small, quiet smile. He hadn't realized how much he'd started looking forward to her texts, her voice, her presence. Not in a needy way, just in the way someone who's been cold for too long leans toward the warmth. Ethan replied, Yes. What time? She sent back, 4:30. Same place. He got up, showered, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. He opened his sketchbook, drew for 20 minutes, then closed it, grabbed his coat, and headed out. He was starting to live again, and it showed. At the bookstore, Claire was already waiting, flipping through a novel near the fiction section. She smiled when she saw him. I was just thinking about you, she said. Why? I saw someone outside wearing a gray hoodie, staring at their shoes, looking lost. I wanted to go hug them. Because I remember when you looked like that, Ethan chuckled. Do I still look lost? Not so much, she said, stepping closer. You look like someone who wants to be found. He met her eyes, something warm rising in his chest. I think I already was, he said. She didn't reply, but her smile deepened. They spent the next hour browsing books and talking about everything, stories they loved, books they hated, and what they would write if they ever tried. You should publish your stories, Ethan said, holding her little notebook. Claire blushed. They're just for me, they're not just anything, he said. You don't know how many people need to read words like yours. She looked at him, touched. I could say the same about your drawings, he shrugged. Drawing helped me survive. I never thought it could mean something to someone else. It does. It means something to me. That moment stayed in the air between them, soft, real, and Ethan felt the strange, wonderful truth settle in his heart. He wasn't alone anymore. Days passed, then weeks. They started seeing each other outside their Tuesday bridge walks more often. Sunday coffees, Friday night bookstore trips, even slow walks through the city during quiet afternoons. People started to notice. At work, Tom asked again, Who's the girl? Ethan smiled shyly. Just someone who makes things feel better. Tom raised an eyebrow. You're smiling more. Keep her around. Ethan didn't need to be told. He had already made up his mind. One Saturday, Claire invited Ethan to her apartment. It was a small, cozy place with books stacked in corners and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. A worn red couch sat near the window, next to a dusty keyboard and a big tea mug filled with pens. This is where the magic happens, she said with a laugh. Ethan looked around. It feels like you, he said. Warm, a little messy, safe. She handed him a cup of tea and sat cross-legged on the couch. Tell me something you've never told anyone. He thought for a moment, then said, I used to talk to my mom even after she was gone. Claire nodded, not surprised. I'd sit in my room and pretend she was there. I'd tell her about my day, about my drawings. I guess I never stopped needing her. Claire reached over and gently touched his hand. I'm sure she'd be proud of you. He looked down. I hope so. I know so, she said, and again. Just like that, a piece of him that had been cold for years began to thaw. Ethan began to change, not all at once, but slowly. He started eating better, sleeping better. He went to work on time, came home with energy, even cleaned the kitchen without dreading it. He bought a plant, named it Max. It didn't die. Claire laughed when he told her, You're healing, she said. I'm not fixed, he replied. You don't have to be, and that became their truth. Healing didn't mean being perfect. It meant growing, piece by piece, with someone who understood the cracks. One evening, as they walked near the bridge, Claire asked, Do you still think about that night? The first night we met? She nodded. Sometimes, he said. Not in the same way. I don't see it as the end anymore. I see it as the beginning. Claire stopped walking. Can I ask something hard? Always. What would have happened if I hadn't smiled? Ethan looked out over the water. I think I still would have jumped, he said honestly. But not that night. That smile. It didn't fix me, but it made me stop. And that pause gave me time. And time gave me you. Claire's eyes shimmered. Then I'm glad I smiled. Me too. They stood at the railing, side by side, watching the dark river below. It didn't seem so cold anymore, not with her hand in his. One morning, Ethan visited his childhood neighborhood for the first time in years. He stood outside the old house where he and his brother grew up. The paint was peeling, the fence was broken, but the tree in the yard was still there, the one they used to climb. He thought about calling his brother, but didn't, not yet. The wounds were still there, but he wasn't angry anymore, just aware. He took out his phone and snapped a photo of the tree. Later, he showed Claire. That's where I used to hide when I didn't want anyone to find me, he said. Claire studied the picture. You're not hiding anymore. No, he said. I'm not. A few weeks later, Claire had news. I submitted one of my stories to a magazine. Ethan's eyes lit up. Which one? The one about the bridge. The first night, he smiled. That's my favorite. I changed the names, she said. But the truth is still there. They celebrated with dinner and ice cream, laughing like teenagers. For the first time in either of their lives, joy didn't feel borrowed. It felt earned and shared. One night, as they lay on a blanket under the stars at a quiet park, Claire whispered, I never asked you, why did you really come back to the bridge the second time? Ethan looked at her, then up at the sky. I think I wanted to see if the world still had something worth showing up for, and did it. He turned his head toward her. I saw you. Claire reached over and touched his face. Do you think we met by accident? No, he said. I think I was supposed to be on that bridge. I think I was supposed to be seen by you. She smiled. That night, I almost didn't walk. I had a headache. I was tired, but something told me to go. They were quiet for a moment. Then Ethan said, maybe broken people are drawn to each other, not to fix each other, but to remind each other how to feel. Claire nodded slowly. I didn't save you, she said again. No, he agreed. You didn't, but you made me want to save myself. They lay side by side in the grass, the stars wide and clear above, and for the first time, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, this was what peace felt like. Not loud, not perfect, just real. Ethan stood in front of his mirror one morning, freshly shaved, hair trimmed, shirt tucked in. He didn't recognize himself, not in a bad way, just surprised. The man looking back at him had life in his eyes, Not bright, shiny confidence, but something. Softer presence. He didn't avoid his reflection anymore. He didn't flinch at the thought of facing a new day. He had become someone new. Or maybe he had just returned to the person he was always meant to be, and the funny thing was, it started with something as small as a smile, a stranger's smile. Claire, the magazine published her story 2 weeks later. It was a short piece, only 3 pages long, but it spread faster than she expected. Teachers shared it. Book clubs discussed it. Some readers sent in letters, saying the story helped them find hope in their own dark places. Claire was shocked. "I didn't think anyone would read it," she said, her voice full of wonder. "It was just our story, just a moment. Sometimes moments are everything," Ethan replied. She held the letter from the editor in her hands, fingers trembling just a bit. "They want more," she said. Ethan smiled. "Then give them more." At his office, Ethan started volunteering for new projects. He wasn't loud about it. He didn't crave praise, but he started raising his hand, helping out, offering support. One of his coworkers, Megan, quietly told him, "You know, when you talk now, people really listen." He blinked. "I didn't used to talk much." "I know," she said. "That's why it matters." Ethan carried those words with him the rest of the day. People were starting to see him, because he was finally letting himself be seen. On a Thursday morning, Claire invited Ethan to her school. "Career day," she explained. "I thought maybe you could talk about being an artist." "I'm not really an artist," he said quickly. "You are," she said firmly. "You see the world differently. That's what artists do." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." He spent the next night flipping through his sketchbooks, trying to choose a few drawings that wouldn't scare or bore a room full of 10-year-olds. When he walked into the classroom, a dozen bright faces stared up at him. Claire stood near the board, beaming. Ethan took a breath and started speaking about lines and shadows, about how sometimes you draw to understand feelings you don't have words for, about how art had saved his life when nothing else could. The kids were quiet. Then, one boy in the front row raised his hand. "Did you ever draw something sad and feel better after?" Ethan smiled gently every time. The boy nodded slowly, then whispered, "Me too." Afterward, Claire hugged him in the hallway. "You were perfect," she whispered. Ethan didn't say anything, but he held her tighter than ever, because that boy's quiet voice reminded him why he was still here and why he needed to stay. But healing isn't just about forward motion. Sometimes it's about facing the past. One night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, holding his phone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found it. Daniel Walker, his brother. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years, not since their fight, not since Ethan had said, "I don't need you," and Daniel had said, "Then don't call again." But the silence had grown too loud. He stared at the screen for a long time, then pressed call. 1 ring, 2, 3. "Hello?" Ethan froze. "Hello?" The voice said again, deeper, cautious. "Dan. It's me." A pause. "Ethan?" "Yeah." Silence. Then, "You okay?" "No, but I'm trying to be." Another pause. Then his brother said, "I'm glad you called." And just like that, the wall between them began to fall. The next week, they met for lunch. It was awkward at first, the way it always is when pain sits quietly at the table between two people. But slowly, the words came. They talked about their parents, about old jokes, about all the things they had never said when they needed to. "I didn't know how bad it got for you," Daniel said. "I didn't let anyone know," Ethan admitted. "Not even myself." Daniel looked at him, eyes soft. "You're still here. That means something." They didn't hug, not that day, but they promised to meet again, and they did, step by step. The brotherhood began to rebuild. Meanwhile, Claire's writing career quietly bloomed. She published 2 more stories. A small publisher offered her a book deal. "I don't know if I'm ready," she told Ethan, pacing in her apartment. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to begin." She stopped pacing, smiled. You sound like me now. He grinned. I had a good teacher. One evening, after watching the stars in silence, Claire asked Ethan, "Do you ever think about that night?" "I mean, really think about it?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. She waited. He continued, "I think about what would have happened if you hadn't smiled. If you'd looked the other way. If you'd walked past me like everyone else always did." Claire said nothing. "I think about it a lot," he admitted. "Not in a sad way anymore. Just in a grateful one." She squeezed his hand. "You were never invisible to me, Ethan. Not even for a second." He looked at her, his throat tight. "You saw me before I remembered how to see myself." She nodded, her eyes wet, and then she whispered, "I love you, Ethan." The words floated into the night air, soft, trembling, true. Ethan didn't reply right away. He let the moment sit, breathe, then he said it back, "I love you too," and it felt like exhaling after holding his breath for years. They didn't become perfect after that. They still had hard days, days when Ethan didn't want to get out of bed, days when Claire doubted herself, but they showed up for each other. They didn't fix each other. They walked beside each other. That was more than enough. A year after that night on the bridge, Ethan returned to it alone. He brought a single flower and placed it on the bench where he had first sat after stepping back from the edge. He whispered, "Thank you," to the air, not to the sky, not to God, just to the moment that had saved him, and to the smile that had changed his path. Later that night, he and Claire lay side by side on the couch, a soft movie playing, their fingers interlocked. He turned to her and said, "Do you think we were meant to meet that night?" She didn't answer right away, then said, "I think we were meant to be exactly where we were, so we could see each other at the right time." He nodded, closed his eyes, and smiled, because now, he knew, was never really alone. He had just needed someone to remind him of his worth, and now he did the same for others, one smile at a time. It had been 1 year, 2 months, and 6 days since Ethan stood on that bridge, ready to end everything. A year since a stranger smiled at him and sat down beside him, changing his life forever. Now, that stranger Claire was no longer a stranger. She was home. They had moved in together 2 months ago. Nothing fancy, just a small apartment with big windows and soft couches, the kind of place that always smelled like coffee and paper. Ethan had turned the spare room into a studio. Claire had filled the shelves with her stories. They still had quiet days, sad days, days where the shadows crept back in, but they faced them together. No more hiding, no more pretending. They had both learned that healing isn't loud, it's in the little things, like making tea for someone who had a bad dream, or holding hands when nothing needs to be said, or simply showing up again and again. Ethan sat at his sketch desk one morning, flipping through old pages, drawings of bridges, of people in pain, of Claire's smile. He stopped on one sketch, the very first one he'd made of her. She was sitting on the bridge, holding coffee, looking up at the sky. It had been a moment that changed everything. He turned the page and began a new drawing, a new moment, a new story. That weekend, Claire hosted a small reading for her debut book at a local bookstore. It wasn't a big event, maybe 20 people, some students, a few older couples, one man in a wheelchair. Ethan sat in the front row, heart full. She read a chapter about a man who thought his story was over until a simple smile rewrote the ending. People clapped, some cried. Afterward, a young woman with a gray sweater came up to Claire and said, "Your words made me feel less alone." Claire hugged her. Ethan watched. Something stirred in him. Maybe this was what purpose looked like. Not fame, not money, just helping someone else feel seen. On the walk home, Claire asked, "Do you ever think you'll tell your story?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I already am." She looked confused. He smiled. "In every drawing, in every person I smile at now, in every time I tell someone they matter. That's my story." Claire nodded. "Still, you could write it, share it. He thought about that, then took her hand. Maybe one day, when I'm ready. Weeks passed, then months, seasons changed. One autumn afternoon, Ethan stood on the same bridge, holding his sketchbook. Claire was at a writing retreat. He had come here alone, not in sadness, but in memory. He sat on the bench, watched the water, listened to the wind. Then he noticed something. A boy, maybe 16, standing by the railing, staring down, still, too still. Ethan's heart stopped. He recognized that stillness. He knew it by name, pain. He stood up quietly and walked over. "Hey," he said softly. The boy didn't turn. Ethan took a breath. "It's a quiet place to think," he added. "I used to come here a lot." The boy glanced at him, pale, eyes red. Ethan smiled, not wide, not forced, just real. "I don't know what you're going through," he said, "but I know what it feels like to think no one sees you." The boy blinked, then said, "I'm fine." Ethan nodded. "I used to say that too." They stood in silence. Then Ethan gestured to the bench. "Want to sit?" The boy hesitated, then walked over slowly and sat down. Ethan sat beside him. He didn't ask questions, didn't push, just sat, the way Claire had once sat next to him. After a long silence, the boy said, "My name's Luke." Ethan smiled. "Nice to meet you, Luke." "I'm Ethan." Another pause. Then Luke said, "It's been a really bad year." Ethan looked at him gently. "Want to talk about it?" Luke stared at the river, then began to speak, and Ethan listened. He listened the way Claire once did for him, with stillness and care, and a heart that understood. By the time the sun set, Luke was smiling lady just a little, and Ethan had drawn a quick sketch of him in his notebook. "Can I keep it?" Luke asked. "Of course," Ethan said, tearing the page and handing it to him. Luke stood, gripping the drawing. "Thanks," he whispered. "You didn't have to stop," Ethan replied. "That's exactly why I did." Luke walked off slowly, turning once to wave. Ethan waved back, and when the boy disappeared into the city lights, Ethan sat on the bench and whispered, "Thank you, Claire," because she had taught him how to sit with someone in their pain, how to offer a smile that mattered, how to stay. That night, when Claire returned, Ethan met her at the door. "I saw a boy on the bridge," he said. "He looked like me." "A year ago." Claire touched his face. "What did you do?" "I stopped," Ethan said. "I smiled. I sat with him." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm proud of you." He pulled her close. "I'm proud of us." Later, in bed, he stared at the ceiling. "I think I want to write it," he said. She turned. "Write what?" "My story. Everything. From the first night to now. What it's like to almost give up. And what happens when someone sees you instead." Claire's face lit up. "I'll help you," she said. Ethan smiled. "I know." Months later, the first draft was finished. It was called "The Night I Didn't Jump," and it opened with these words: "Sometimes all it takes is a smile. Not a grand gesture, not a perfect plan, just one human being saying to another, 'I see you. You matter. Please stay.'" The book was published the following year. Small publisher, modest sales, but thousands of letters from people who said the story stopped them from doing what Ethan almost did. One man wrote, "I was standing on my own bridge when I read your words. I stepped back. Thank you," Ethan cried when he read it, then smiled, a deep, real smile, because now he knew he hadn't just survived, he had lived, he had helped, and he had passed on the gift that had once saved him. Now, every Tuesday night, Ethan still visits the bridge. Sometimes Claire comes too, sometimes he goes alone, but he always carries a notebook, and he always smiles at the people who pass, because maybe someone needs it, maybe someone is standing where he once stood, and maybe, just maybe, a single smile can be the start of someone else's new story. The end.